Common Gamer here. Alright, bringing you another video of 11-Day Remembrance of the Truce book. Chapter 2. Things were beginning to look unpleasant. Once set in motion, each country's army moved with surprising speed. Cavalry units galloped up country roads, the sabers rattling at their sides. Following them came thundering lines of horse-driven artillery. Endless parades of soldiers tramped across dusty fields, eager to take on the enemy. After several days of constant shelling, the Austrian army crossed the river Sava and engaged the Serbian capital of Belgrade. Russia divided up its huge force to form two separate armies. One took on the Germans in the northern Poland, while the other one took on the Germans in northern Poland. While the others went south to confront Austrian forces in Gala. The British hastily landed 120,000 men and rushed them north to join with French and Belgian troops trying to stop the Germans before they entered France. Meanwhile, the actions of two armies had been pressured. For many years, Germany wanted to avoid a series of heavily armed fronts that protected the French border. To accomplish this, it followed a plan disputed in 1905 by its former military commander, Alfred von Schuschnigg. The Schuschnigg plan had most of Germany's troops attacking France through neutral Belgium and then descending on Paris from the north. Once Paris had been taken, the army would run around and attack Russia. The French had their own blueprint for war, called Plan XV11. This stated that at an outbreak of conflict with Germany, at least half of the French army would immediately cross the German border in a number of plans to retake Alsace-Lorraine. It would then press on to the German capital of Berlin. By mid-August, fighting was taking place in many locations all over Europe. Meanwhile, enlistment encounters in every country involved were crowded with eager volunteers, scurrying to get into battle as quickly as possible. Not only did they want to defend their homelands, but the men were generously worried that the war would be over before they had a chance to fight. The notion that this would be a brief war come from overly optimistic military leaders. According to Schuschnigg, Paris could be occupied and France defeated within 6 weeks. Once France collapsed, other countries would sue for peace on Germany's terms. The French military allowed more time to complete Plan XV11, believing that the German army could be defeated by Christmas. The soldiers marched off certainly shined this feeling. A British citizen in Germany, Betty Coffin Owen, recalled the Germans left with the light of victory already in their eyes. Count Kazan promised to send a postcard from Paris in a few weeks. Harold Merton was a young, idealistic British lieutenant. When the war ended, and expressed what most soldiers on both sides must have felt. The general view, he wrote later, was that it would be over by Christmas. Our major anxiety was by hook or crook not to miss it. That the idea the war would be a quick and glorious adventure pressured through all the days leading up to the first major battle outside the industrial city of Mons, Belgium. Here on August 23rd, French, Belgian, and British forces, sometimes referred to as the Allies, came face to face with the advancing German army. A British artillery sergeant, Albert George, recalled looking across a wide horizon at the enemy 3 miles away. The order action came down. He remembered, and everybody went to their different duties. Even though they were virtually outnumbered by the enemy, George remained naively confident and was still very pleased to have a go at the Germans. The battle began with an hour-long artillery duel, followed by a mass charge of German infantry across the open terrain. Things were beginning to look unpleasant. George went on as we had to fire our artillery alternately at their infantry and at their artillery, as our infantry had not arrived. At about 12:15 the German gunners found out our battery and things were beginning to get very hot for us. Our shells were dropping all around us. The British infantry fully arrived and waded into battle all that afternoon. George proudly represented we kept the Huns at bay, although they outnumbered us 10-1. But the mid-afternoon it became clear that the sheer size of the German army meant it would eventually prevail. So after 7 hours of furious fighting, the Allied troops began pulling out of Mons. Desperate retreating, George and the troops around him were still enthusiastic. Instead of being downcast, our troops were much improved with the certainty of the rifle fire and maneuvering over the enemy fire and movements and miss in their minds. They hadn't been beaten. They'd been driven back only because the enemy had more soldiers on the field. All they had to do was hold on until the men enlisting back home finally reached the battlefields. After terrifying retreating for 3 days, French and British troops were ordering to make a stand in a small French village called Le Chantereau. George was still eager for the ferry and was pleased that the gun was positioned near the center of a 4-mile-long line of artillery with enemy guns in plain sight 1 mile away. The artillery duel proved to be much more devastating than the one at Mons. George recalled the enemy was soon hunting our guns and wagons and killing most of the gunners. We could see ammunition wagons trying to replenish our guns, getting about halfway to them. Then a couple of shells would burst, throwing the drivers and horses to smithereens. It was a terrible sight. Word soon arrived from the Allied High Command, even though the battle was clearly going against them. They were ordered to stand and fight, so George and his fellow continued loading and firing. Every gun of our army was firing as fast as possible. George was quick to point out, and by report we did awful damage to them. But the German guns outnumbered us 10-1, so you can imagine what had the best chance. They were on the verge of complete collapse when the High Command finally returned and called a retreat. But this was very different from the one at Moon's. This one had been hasty but fairly well organized. This one at Legion 2 was sheer panic, because the opposing armies had been so close to each other the long-range artillery of the Germans could still drop shells onto the retreating soldiers. When they were 2 and 3 miles from the village, the retreatment George recommended battery was a scandalous sight in the history of Britain, and our hurry to get our way guns, wagons, horses, and wounded men were left to the victors, Germans, and even our British infantrymen were throwing away their rifles, ammunition, equipment, and running like hell for their lives. When these soldiers had rushed to enlist, they brought with them 19th century ideals of what warfare would be like. Most men believed that battles were fought under gentlemanly, if unwritten, rules. Once said rule suggested that enemies face each other under openly in combat, where this is their commanding officer and commanded them to do battles using 19th century tactics, which indeed coping and overwhelming enemy with mass charges of infantry. Unfortunately now there was using 20th century weapons with truly terrible destructive powers. At the beginning of World War I, all European armies had infantry rifles that were equipped up to 1,000 yards. These plus machine guns that could shoot between 100 and 500 rounds a minute made it virtually impossible for a mass charge to succeed. Full artillery could free a shell up to 5 miles in distance and were capable of unleashing 20 rounds a minute. Heavy artillery could lob shells with reasonable accuracy up to 25 miles. It was now possible for soldiers to come under a killing barrage and never really see the enemy. During the years to follow, other lethal weapons joined these to wreak havoc on soldiers and civilians alike. They included airplanes and zeppelins armed with machine guns and bombs, armored tanks, flamethrowers, portable mortars, and poison gas. More important, military equipment and tactics, and not evolved too much. These more sophisticated weapons. No one had faced these savage weapons in actual battle so efficiently. Countermeasures had never been thought out and tested. As hard as it to believe, most soldiers going into combat in 1914 didn't even have steel helmets to protect them from flying pieces of metal. In addition, the top commanders on both sides stuck with the notion that their troops were superior to the enemy and could overcome any obstacle by sheer domination. Following the battle at Lake Chateau, the Allied forces retreated for nearly 2 weeks, all the while being pursued and attacked by the enemy. Captain E. L. Spears recalled watching French soldiers scrambling past him, heads down, red trousers and blue coats, and gratefully for the dust bombing bumping into trucks, into abandoned carts, into each other. They shuffled down the endless roads, their eyes filled with dust. The minute the soldiers came to, they saw clearly only the foreground of disfigured path, crushed men, and an obstacle abandoned gun. The soldiers weren't the only ones suffering in the late summer heat. Dead and dying horses splashed at laying numbers side by side. Roads worse. The horses dying, but not yet dead. Sometimes struggling a little, a strange appeal in their eyes, looked, sometimes struggling, looked at the passing columns, who just overheard them, caking their thirsty lips and nostrils. In place, the retreat covered almost 120 miles, with the Germans coming within 30 miles of Paris. It appeared to everyone that the Germans would complete the conquest of France in a few weeks. Then, on September 4th, the Allies carried out a desperate counterattack called the Battle of the Marne. The final halted the Germans' advance. How could they have succeeded against such odds? By the time German soldiers, what was left of them, had been marching and fighting frenziedly for more than 30 days. Their commanders and officers had punished so hard to fulfill the sizzling plan that the advance forces were hundreds of miles from supply lines and reserve soldiers. That meant that these forgotten soldiers could be replenished by fresh recruits. And instead, in addition of fighting, they had to travel on foot, carrying supplies, heavy equipment, and weapons, desperate, the exhausted, injured. Adding to the Germans, who was the fierce resistance put up by Belgian and French civilians, while these freedom fighters were no match for the highly trained and well-equipped German soldiers. They did not force them to deploy thousands of troops to guard food and weapons supplies. By the beginning of September, the Germans were as much diminished with exhausted by their victors as the British, French, and Belgians were in defeat. The Allied counterattack proved to be so successful that it began pushing back the German army. The Germans might have lost even more ground, except that as October neared, all of the countries involved in the war found themselves short on ammunition and men. Quite simply, there hadn't been enough time to take the most recent enlistment rounds and train them and get them to the front lines in the war. In this autumn days ahead, there would be more changes and counter-changes, handing them victory as fine rainstorms, some losing several days by October. The armies had to come grinding halt on every front. They entrusted all warnings. Army flag wrote Mr. John W. Wheeler Bennett, worn out by defeats fighting in the villages of the now swampy country. Fierce fighting continued, but no army seemed capable of drawing back the enemy. Instead, soldiers struggled from village to village, then farm to farm, and then lines of battle seemed to hardly move at all. This closeness of the enemy and rising consistently focused them, commanders of both sides, to make a measuring decision. Soldiers would begin digging trenches to hide from the killing fire, though Athens, Netherlands, and Serbia and Romania, between the Austrian and Serbian Russian forces. It happened in Poland, Gierland, Galita between Germany, Austria troops and Russian troops. One of these most dramatic battle lines formed came to be the Western Front. Here, two patriotic lines, one held by the Germans, the other by the French. English Belgians from 50 to 1,000 yards apart, stretched from the North Sea coast all the way to Swiss border, a total of over 475 miles in between, with a ravaged wasteland, crossed by tangles of razor-sharp barbed wire and a project nicknamed "No Man's Land", as the men on each side cautiously watched the enemy across from them. They understood that they had endangered an altogether new kind of warfare. This is Conan Gamer. More remembrance videos will be up. Please go to veteran and thank them for their service, for what they did for our freedoms. If they have not fought for this, I would not be able to do these YouTube videos. If I did, it'd be controlled by some person telling me what to do. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. This is Common Gamer signing off. Please comment, rate, and subscribe. And hit the like button.